If you love stories where power hides in plain sight, where ordinary people become legends, and where justice arrives at 35,000 feet, hit subscribe right now, because this story will change the way you look at every flight attendant you've ever seen. The cabin lights hummed softly as Flight 702 cut through the night sky over the Atlantic. A routine red-eye packed with exhausted travelers, crying babies, businessmen half asleep behind glowing laptops, and a quiet flight attendant named Lena Morales moving through the aisle with a practiced smile, her posture relaxed, her voice calm, her eyes observant in a way no one noticed, because no one ever notices the help. And that was exactly how Lena preferred it, because 10 years earlier she had learned in the cockpit of an F-15 that invisibility could be more powerful than dominance. And as she poured coffee into a paper cup for seat 18C, she clocked the micro-movements, the twitch of a jaw, the tension in a shoulder, the way four men who didn't know each other well were trying too hard not to look at one another. And when the first scream shattered the cabin and the nearest of them stood up with a pistol raised and shouted for everyone to stay seated, Lena did not flinch, did not gasp, did not freeze, because fear was a luxury she had burned out of her system somewhere over Kandahar when a missile lock alarm screamed in her headset and she had seconds to live. And now, as the hijackers surged forward, one rushing the cockpit, another firing a warning shot into the ceiling, Lena did the math in her head with the same cold clarity she once used to calculate fuel burn and evasive angles, counting steps, counting heartbeats, counting how long before the aircraft would become a weapon. And when the cockpit door slammed shut and the captain's muffled shout cut off mid-word, the cabin erupted into chaos. Passengers crying, praying, dialing phones that would never connect. And the lead hijacker began shouting demands about course changes and political prisoners, his voice shaking despite the gun in his hand. And Lena noticed that shake, because men who believed in their cause didn't shake like that. Men who were improvising did. And as she knelt beside an elderly woman, pretending to secure an oxygen mask, Lena slipped her hand beneath the service card and felt the familiar comforting shape of a reinforced flashlight, heavy enough to fracture bone. And she remembered her call sign, Valkyrie, painted beneath the cockpit of her jet along with 3 small kill marks that no longer existed except in her memory. Because after the crash, after the inquiry, after the politicians needed a scapegoat for a Black Ops mission gone wrong, Lena Morales had been grounded permanently, stripped of her wings, quietly discharged, her medals locked away in a box she never opened. And becoming a flight attendant wasn't a step down for her. It was a way to stay close to the sky without letting it kill her. And now the sky had followed her back, because one of the hijackers dragged a man from his seat and pressed a gun to his head. And Lena saw in the man's eyes the same look she had seen in rookie pilots right before they panicked. And she stood up slowly, hands raised, voice gentle, saying she could help, that she had training, that she knew how to keep everyone calm. And the hijacker sneered and shoved her back, calling her a waitress. And something inside Lena clicked into place. Not anger, not hatred, but alignment. The same internal switch that flipped before every combat sortie, narrowing the world to objectives and outcomes. And as the hijackers herded passengers toward the rear of the plane, Lena slipped away down the galley, her mind racing through aircraft schematics she knew better than her own apartment, because commercial cockpits were cousins to military ones, different systems, same bones. And she reached the jump seat phone and tried the cockpit. No answer. But she didn't expect one, because she knew how quickly things went bad once someone breached that door. And when the first explosion rocked the plane, a small charge, intentional, meant to prove seriousness, oxygen masks dropped, screaming intensified, and Lena felt the cold of the town's aircraft yaw slightly. Someone inexperienced at the controls, someone overcorrecting, and she knew then that if she didn't act, everyone on board would die. Not because the hijackers wanted it, but because they didn't know how to fly what they had stolen. And she thought of her father teaching her to fly crop dusters over New Mexico, of the recruiter who told her she was too small to make it in fighters, of the instructor who later told her she was the best stick he'd seen in 20 years. And she moved, quietly disabling one hijacker from behind with a precise strike to the brachial plexus, catching his falling weapon before it clattered, dragging him into the galley and zip-tying his wrists with practiced speed. Because in combat, you never. Another hijacker charged at her. She used the narrow aisle to her advantage, letting him overextend, breaking his knee with a stomp that echoed like a gunshot. And for a brief moment, the passengers saw her not as a flight attendant, but as something else, something terrifying and controlled. And whispers spread. Who is she? What is she? And Lena didn't answer because she was already moving toward the cockpit, knowing she had seconds. because the aircraft lurched again, altitude dropping, speed bleeding off, stall warning chirping faintly through the door, and she slammed her shoulder into the reinforced barrier again and again until something gave, and inside she found chaos. One hijacker dead from an accidental discharge, another bleeding, and the captain slumped unconscious, and Lena vaulted into the left seat, shoving the surviving hijacker aside with a force born of urgency, her hands finding the yoke like they had been waiting for her all along, correcting pitch, adding thrust, silencing the warning alarms one by one. And as the plane stabilized, the hijacker stared at her in disbelief, asking who she was, and Lena answered without looking at him, "Someone who knows how to land this." And when he lunged for her, she elbowed him back and slammed his head into the panel, knocking him out cold. And only then did she take a breath, radioing a mayday with a calm, authoritative voice that made air traffic control go silent for half a second before snapping into action. And as fighter jets scrambled to intercept, Lena briefed them with precision, explaining the situation, requesting escort, calculating fuel remaining, and when the captain regained consciousness and looked at her with awe, she simply said, "I've got it." And hours later, as dawn broke pink over the runway and Flight 702 touched down safely amid flashing lights and waiting ambulances, the passengers erupted into applause, crying, hugging, chanting her name even though they barely knew it, and Lena stepped out into the glare of cameras she had avoided for a decade, government agents already moving in, faces pale as they recognized her, because somewhere in a classified file, her name was circled in red, marked, "Do not fly, do not engage." And yet here she was, having saved 300 lives with the skills they had once discarded. And in the days that followed, as the story exploded across America, as pundits argued and officials scrambled, as her old squadron mates reached out in quiet messages of pride, Lena was offered reinstatement, medals, money, fame. But she refused most of it because redemption wasn't something others could give her. And when asked why she stayed so calm, why she acted when others froze, she answered simply that the sky doesn't care who you are, only what you can do. And somewhere high above, in contrails crossing the morning sun, 3 invisible kill marks flew again, not as symbols of death, but of lives saved by a flight attendant no one saw coming.